What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this, I want to break down what's going on with the overall markets, talk about the whole situation involving Iran and Israel this morning, what's happening with the economic calendars. We have Jerome Powell giving a speech very soon, and what you should be watching for in the charts, in my personal opinion. But before I begin the devil's information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Weeble link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Weeble and deposit $500, you're guaranteed 20 free stocks. If you deposit $25,000 or more, you're guaranteed 75 of them, and the offer ends very soon in just a couple of weeks. Anyways, looking at SPY right now, this thing is attempting to rebound just a tiny bit, but it's not really strong in any way, shape, or form. I could see an attempt to get very close to about 507, but I do anticipate that it might continue lower because the trend is still very weak and we're still getting some negative news. So what is negative news? Well, this right over here, there have been a lot of tensions between Iran and Israel going back and forth and back and forth. But one thing that happened was that after Iran launched its retaliatory attacks over the weekend, now Israel's vowing to do the same thing. They're vowing to conduct a counterattack as well against Iran. And many of their very important officials and military leaders are saying that. So they have their war cabinets that's saying that, not to mention their Ministry of Defense is getting involved. So we're seeing this happen despite the fact that other countries such as the US and China are trying to both kind of like come in and restrain both sides. If anything, right? We have the U.S. telling Israel to calm down. We're seeing China doing the same thing to Iran alongside others. But for now, I just want to say this: the situation is still tense. That's all you need to worry about. Okay, we're not going to argue about who started what or this and that. That's for another day. Just know that the situation is still tense. It has not eased, and because it's still tense, it's still a bit more bearish for the markets, at least for the time being. So that's something worth noting. And as long as it remains tense, things are not necessarily cooling off just yet, and the market could still remain bearish. For data that's coming out, please know that we're about to get the industrial and manufacturing production numbers that could come out. Could cause some volatility, but nothing too crazy. Then here are the main pieces of data for the day when the market opens. We have the bill auctions coming out at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then we have Williams from the Fed giving a speech, not to mention Jerome Powell also giving a speech at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Jerome Powell is going to be talking with the governor of the Bank of Canada. That's going to be very important because what they discuss could involve the Israel situation and also what the Fed is going to do as a result of all of that. When it comes to earnings, we had Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Johnson Johnson, and a couple of others. Bank of America did relatively well with earnings, at least according to the reports. They beat on EPS, they beat on revenue. You guys can see the numbers right here. They just barely beat on revenue, despite the fact that their profits fell about 18%. They did announce that their guidance was not that bad overall. It's pretty decent guidance, topping some estimates with net income increasing. So, excuse me, this is actually not bad whatsoever. And with their guidance being a little bit higher than what we saw in the past, things are looking pretty good for them as well. So this is pretty decent overall. For Morgan Stanley, on the other hand, uh, simultaneously they did even better. So it wasn't as mixed as Bank of America's. They did even better than that. They beat on EPS. They beat on revenue. Their quarterly profit rose 14%. The shares have jumped 3.6% as a result of that. Equity trading revenue rose 4.1%. And their guidance was not bad whatsoever. So we got some good earnings today from Morgan Stanley, not to mention Bank of America. There's also news coming out for Tesla. I just wanted to call out that Tesla's laying off more than 10% of its global workforce. That is still affecting it to this day. Even right now, that announcement came out yesterday. So we'll just have to see how the market moves from here. If SPY continues to try to rebound a bit, we're going to be looking at this resistance at 507. That's where the 20 EMA happens to be. And above that, if we do break through that, we could get closer to about this 510 area. If we fail to break past this trend line, this resistance right over here, we're going to likely start sinking back down. If we lose 503, our next target is 500 and 497. In my personal opinion, I think SPY could attempt to go a little higher, but it might end up failing depending on what Jerome Powell says. And there is a risk of it dipping even lower looking at the current technicals. Because when you zoom out of the chart, let me just do this real quick. If you go to like the daily time frame like this, you could notice that SPY has that big gap to fill. I think we're going to fill that gap. In the pre-market, we're rebounding a bit, but then we might continue lower. If we lose the low at 503, I think we might end up just filling this gap very soon to 497. And I see a very, very high probability that that's going to get filled soon. So it could rebound a bit and then eventually continue lower. But I think this gap might get filled and we might see a demand zone over there. On the QQQ, we have a similar setup. We have this big gap to fill below. We're also already starting to fill it on the QQQ. Could come all the way down to about 425 very soon. So I see risks of downside. Could take like a week or so, could take a couple of days. I just want to call that out on SPY and the QQQ. So in terms of levels, make sure you watch support at 505 and 503. If you lose 503, we turn a lot more bearish. We'll likely fill the gap. If we hold above it, we could shuffle for a bit, and it also depends on what Powell says. But I do want to note that there is a risk of more downside. I think the same thing with the QQQ. I think there's a risk of downside as well. Could rebound a bit, retest 433 to 434 before it continues lower. If we lose 429, look for a risk all the way down to about 425. We're going to likely fill the gap soon if we end up losing that support. For Nvidia, going to be looking for a test of 872 to 877. If we lose that support, if we reject off this resistance, we could start dipping all the way down to 844, if not 834. So look for a little pump, then a rejection, and drop lower. I do see that to be very probable for Nvidia. I think we're going to eventually fill our gap in the 823 area. So look for this thing to pop a bit more. Then eventually I do see a risk of some downside. For Apple stock, we're kind of stuck between two EMAs. We have 171.6 as support and we have 173 as resistance. I think there's a risk of it kind of popping and then dropping, eventually losing 171 and then beginning to sink all the way down to this imbalance into 170. So I see a risk of it kind of pushing a bit, then eventually losing support and sinking. I find that that's to be very probable. Palantir is looking a bit more bearish as well. We did call this out yesterday, made retest the 20 EMA then dip. It didn't even get the retest, it just continued to dip. We called downside on Supermicro. We called this downside trend on Supermicro. It is rebounding just a bit, but I do see a risk of it falling. So just be a little bit careful. We're still testing our 50 EMA. Might go a little higher towards this 920 area, and I think it could end up dipping after that. So just be careful, guys. There is a risk of this popping and dropping. For the IWM, we're going to be looking for a test of about 196 before it continues lower, but the trend is very bearish. Might try to rebound first before it continues. Amazon's also looking a little bit weak. Going to be looking for a test of 184. If it fails to break that, going to be coming all the way back down towards 181. So I'm seeing some risks of downside on this, not to mention on Meta. Something very similar. We're just shuffling around the 500 area. We could test 503 if we fail to break it, though. We're going to continue to sink. So look for a little pop and drop. I could see a risk of more downside. The VIX is still on an uptrend, so this is bearish for the markets, and we'll just have to give this more time and see how things go from here. But with that being said, thank you all so much for listening. Please have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. Remain calm, cool, and collected. I'll see you guys very soon on the next video. So make sure you watch supply and demand. Get ready. The market may pop a little bit, but then there is going to be a risk of downside given the current situation. Not to mention Jerome Powell giving a speech at 1:15 p.m. So be ready, guys. Get ready for Powell's speech, and we'll see how things go. With that being said, thank you for listening. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you and peace out.